Hello, everyone. I'm here joined by Michael Shermer. Today is a very impressive and amazing conversation that we'll have. A bit of a background on Dr. Michael Shermer. He is the founding publisher of the Skeptic magazine, the executive director of the Skeptic Society, and a presidential fellow at Chapman University, where he teaches Skepticism 101. For 18 years, he was a monthly columnist for Scientific American, and he's an author of New York Times bestsellers Why People Believe Weird Things and The Believing Brain, The Science of Good and Evil, The Moral Arc, and Heavens on Earth. His newest book is Conspiracy, which we'll discuss today, Why the Rational Believe the Irrational. So, Michael, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, nice to see you. Thanks for having me on the show.
I'm very excited because having a conversation with you in these times, in these ages of, accelerated artificial intelligence, social media connectedness, all of this thinking that we're being exposed to, we're being pulled to so many directions, and I believe we don't have the skill sets to really differentiate what to believe and what not to believe. So I appreciate you helping us do carving a path to do that. But before we really dive deep into it, Michael, what motivated you to become a science writer and a skeptic? And how has your work evolved during these years? How has your work evolved?
The bigger picture, yeah. Well, when I was in college, I was interested in a lot of these topics that I write about now. Science and religion. I was religious at the time. The paranormal, the supernatural, miracles, UFOs, aliens, psychic power, ESP. I thought all that was super interesting. And, as I got training in science, I got interested in figuring out how do you know what to believe? Because people make all sorts of claims. Which ones should I believe and which should I be skeptical of? And really, it's science that's best equipped to do that. That is to figure out what I should believe, what's likely to be true, what's likely not to be true, what's presently indeterminate. Where should I put my credence here or there? How do I evaluate evidence? That's what scientists, grad students and undergrads and grad students are trained how to do. Particularly in my field, initially in the experimental psychology, the whole thing is designed, research methods and statistics and, that sort of thing trains you where to draw the line. That is, it's like a signal detection problem. There's a lot of noise. Is there a signal in the noise? How do you know? And it's clear now from a century of research in psychology, we're not intuitively equipped to determine that on our own. Our instincts and intuitions are often very misleading. And, we are subject to a host of cognitive biases, motivated reasoning, my side bias, confirmation bias, hindsight bias, self-serving bias, self-justification bias, attribution bias. I mean, there's dozens and dozens of them that if you work alone, you're going to probably go down the wrong path. So science is very communal exercise in which you bounce your ideas off other people and test them that way. So that's kind of the bigger picture. I started Skeptic magazine. Here's what it looks like, by the way. This is our latest issue on nationalism matters. And we're a quarterly publication. We started with my partner there above my shoulder, Pat Lindsay, in 1992. She passed away last year. And we've been publishing quarterly Skeptic issues ever since. Each one has a particular theme, but we cover all the usual topics that I've just mentioned and many more.
Yeah, I would love to dive deep into all of the biases that you mentioned and all of these crazy conspiracy theories that may not seem very crazy for few, or actually some turn out to be true. But all of this is going to be a very in-depth conversation in terms of those topics. But Michael, before we really dive deep, I'm curious to know, you saw probably a demand or maybe this void to be filled in a world of skepticism and scientific thinking. So what was the desire? How was that born? And also, why should we think on skepticism and science thinking? Like, how should we approach skepticism today?
Well, I guess you have to ask yourself, do you have goals or not? Do you want to know things or not? Do you want to understand reality or not? And, if you have goals and you want to achieve them, you have to have some kind of knowledge about the world. And the best way to do that is through rationality and empiricism and logic and science and philosophy and so on. I mean, there are tools, depending on what labels you want to use, to get at reliable knowledge. That is what I should believe and what I should not believe, and that will help you determine what goals, how to achieve your goals. It won't tell you which goals you should achieve. That's kind of personal, but whatever it is, there are tools of thinking that get you there, are more likely to get you there than not. And so, in any case, I don't think there's any sacred cows. We can address any particular claims about the world, including moral claims and meaning. Morality and meaning has often been relegated to religion, but there's no reason why science and philosophy can't also address those questions.
How can science address the question of meaning? Because sometimes we fail to realize that through scientific thinking and through our tools, like you mentioned, meaning can arise. So do you see this way of thinking as conflicting with religion? Is it a zero-sum game, or they can work together?
Oh, no, they can work together for sure. And in fact, empirically, they do, because lots of religious people are really into science, and a lot of professional scientists believe in God, and they're religious of various sorts. So obviously it can. How does it happen in the mind? Well, first you have logic-type compartments. That is, people often separate their scientific work or their rational world from this kind of other world, this mythic world or religious world or political world. There's different kinds of beliefs or truths or whatever you want to call them. If I say, well, I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican, that may, and you're a scientist, you probably hold those beliefs for reasons different than you believe in the theory of evolution or the Big Bang theory or the germ theory of disease or whatever, likely to be the case. What I'm arguing is that it doesn't have to be that way. We can actually make claims, even political or religious claims, grounded in empirical evidence, for example, and at least give it a try, right? That's what I did in The Moral Arc. And in Giving the Devil is Due, I have a few essays on pushing that idea a little further. Facts and values, that is, they can overlap. Maybe not perfectly, but in terms of like meaning, well, first, on one level, it's very personal. Like, what do you do to find meaning in life? It's likely to be slightly different from mine. But in fact, research on how people find meaningfulness, purposefulness, happiness, self-satisfaction, or well-being, whatever terms we want to use, there's certain commonalities that come up over and over, like having meaningful work, having a reason to get up in the morning, get out the door, and go off somewhere and do something. That is pretty universal. Most people like that. They feel like they're useful that way. Yeah. Having a social network, friends, a community of people you like just hanging out with. Maybe you have a hobby you do together, or a sport, or whatever. Just these are not workmates. These are just friends, people you hang out with outside of work. And then family, having somebody, a partner, a meaningful relationship, children, parents, siblings, cousins, whatever, extended family. That seems to bring people a lot of meaningfulness and happiness. And then something got a little more nebulous, hard to define, is something like spirituality or transcendence, or, doing something occasionally that takes you out of your own skin. So it's not just you, it's not an ego-centered, and this could be religion, or it could be some kind of spirituality or yoga or doing dance or meditation or, Buddhism or, whatever. I mean, there's just, lots of different tools to get there, but the idea is to take yourself out of your own ego. And those four things, that seems to be common amongst people who have been studied there's psychologists who study meaningfulness and happiness and so on. Those seem to be core elements.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. And like you say, we're part of a bigger society, a bigger group, whether it's a community, whether it's a nation, whether it's a tribe, like in evolutionary terms, all of these notions. And it seems that in today's world, we're being pulled towards so many directions in terms of our beliefs, in terms of how we think the world really works, and what to believe in, like we mentioned before. So, Michael, what are some of the key important challenges you think we face today, and how your ideas help us to address them, and what are some of the key insights we can attain from, thinking in a more structural sense about the world?
Well, I mean, since this is what I do for my day job, nationalism, race,
Yeah.
abortion, trans. I mean, these are all hot button issues that we take on because I want to know, to what extent does science have something to say about any of these topics? Now, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it does. How do you know? Okay, so we address those issues. I mean, that last one, nationalism, the people screaming at each other image we have here addresses what you just brought up. That is how tribal we are, how emotionally committed and kind of involved we are in our tribes. It could be political tribes in this particular case, but it could be your religion or your ideology or whatever it is that you believe. And the idea that somebody believes different from you. You asked what are some of the biggest problems today. This is one of them. Is that we've kind of gotten to the point where it's not just that people differ from me. That they're wrong, and not just wrong, but immoral or even evil for believing this thing that I don't believe. And this could be something trivial, like what's the right percentage of immigrants we should allow into America? I think now it's 150,000 a year or something like that, which is a fairly low number for such a big country. But what's the right number? So people are passionate about this. It's too many. It's not enough. What's the right number? 100,000, 200,000, a million? 10. And I'm not sure that science can tell us the right answer to that. There is no right answer. It depends on the goals of the country. Do you want more immigrants or don't you? And what do you want them for fulfilling jobs that your citizens don't want to do? Will it goose the economy? Because let's say we have a lot of immigrants from India who are trained in tech, and they want to go to Silicon Valley, and they want to work at Google or Apple or YouTube or Facebook or whatever. And so we've set a goal. But what if that's not your goal? What if you have some other goal and you'd rather have immigrants that work in taking care of homes or childcare, gardening, so there you want people from other countries that want to do those jobs, and so on and so on. So science can't tell us those goals. But it can tell us, well, if this is what you want, then here's what you got to do to get that. Right. And so those are, I would say, are the messiest problems. I mean, abortion, pro-life, pro-choice, or maybe you're pro-choice for other people, but you're pro-life for yourself. I mean, there's different positions. What's the right answer? There probably isn't a right answer, although we've been moving over the decades more and more toward giving women reproductive rights. And yet still an argument can be made that, you're protecting the life of the fetus. Isn't that also moral? Yeah, sure. That, so then you end up with conflicting rights, like trans rights versus the rights of women to compete in sports with only other women and not men who are claiming to be women, right? That's a conflicting rights. You can't have everything. And so to there, we kind of hit a wall. I'm not sure science can tell us the correct answer there, but it can at least help guide our decisions.
Yeah. And like you say, it's an ongoing process of thinking of things. And even though they're button topics, without us discussing them and having an open dialogue and an open-minded approach to them, we can't figure out ever the real answer, or maybe just plan ahead or figure out the real answer that works best for everyone. So, Michael, you also mentioned our scientific tools, and there's one question that I wanted to ask you in terms of the tools we have to make sense of the world around us. How much can we really trust the tools that we use, the methods that we use, because they keep changing, they keep adapting to a new reality. For example, there was a new emergence of how we may be able to clear nuclear fusion and which is a limitless energy for thousands of years, or even revisit the theory of the Big Bang. What is the Big Bang really? So how do you navigate this moving reality that inevitably we inhabit, and how does that in and of itself not dissuade you in trusting our scientific tools?
Well, I read a lot of books. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I talk to a lot of experts on my own show. Yeah, there are no sacred cows. I mean, it could be the Big Bang theory, although it's pretty robust, and it's certainly better than the steady state theory. You know, that competition kind of worked itself out in the 1960s, and now we're pretty confident in the Big Bang theory. But maybe that's only the first bang. Maybe there are bangs before that. Maybe it's a cyclical universe. Maybe there's something we don't quite understand about what triggered the Big Bang. I mean, some singularity or something. Now I'm way out of my league here. I'm a social scientist, not a physicist or cosmologist, but this is what I'm told. And that to address your question, you should not rely on any one source ever. Doesn't even matter if it's Stephen Hawking or, whoever, some genius, Einstein, whatever the equivalent of that, because nobody is omniscient, right? So this is the fundamental place where we begin. I'm not God and neither are you. Or there is an objective reality, only I don't know what it is and neither do you. So we need to work together to figure out how close we can get to understanding that world, that reality. And we're going to be flawed. And we're all in a context of our culture, our time, and so on. If you went back 200 years or forward 200 years, the worldviews and theories are going to be probably quite different. Well, they are quite different in the past. So you have to really pay close attention to doubters, to skeptics. Skepticism is a virtue. And but so, for example, somebody says, well, I'm a skeptic. I'm a skeptic of vaccines, or I'm skeptic of climate change, or I'm skeptic of the theory of evolution or whatever. Okay. Well, it's not a virtue by itself. Like you should just be skeptical of everything and believe nothing that anybody ever says. No expert has ever been right, and therefore I'm not going to believe anything. Well, that's not true, right? There's degrees of confidence you can have in theories, more or less. And given that it's always provisional, you can provisionally say, for now, I'm going to accept this hypothesis, the Big Bang, theory of evolution, vaccines work, climate change is real, or whatever. But always stating, but I could change my mind. I'm willing to change my mind if the facts change. Go ahead, make it. Give me your best shot. What is it you think about X that I'm missing? And then, by the way, you have to tell me what you would do to change your mind. Let's say you don't accept the Big Bang theory. Well, why not? What would it take for you to accept it, or the theory of evolution, or that vaccines don't cause autism, or vaccines do work to attenuate the spread of COVID-19, whatever it is. And, so it's always good to keep an open mind, but not so open that you believe everything or you believe nothing. You got to believe something to get out of bed and get out into the world and function. So what is it you believe and why?
Yeah. And, you mentioned how we tend to believe certain things. And one of the insights that I take from what you just said is that those beliefs we tend to really be emotional about, those should be the ones we really should target. Like, why do I believe this? And try to disassociate my identity with my belief of vaccines, of climate change. And if you're saying, hey, I have another contentious idea about your belief, that doesn't necessarily mean automatically that you have a conflicting notion against my identity, against my own self, which I believe it's tending to increase in today's world. We're really in a very rapid way, all of our beliefs become our identities. So it's an automatic insult.
Yes, well, so you got to take personalities out of it and just deal with ideas, right? So you don't want to attack somebody's personhood, like you're an idiot for not believing the theory of evolution. That's not going to get you anywhere. And it's not likely the person that doesn't accept the theory of evolution is stupid. Most of the creationists, for example, intelligent design theorists I've met, they're not dumb at all. They're highly intelligent, educated, thoughtful people that reason their way to their conclusions. I think their reasoning is flawed, and I explain why in one of my books. It was in Darwin. Why Darwin matters. But in any case, in all debate, disputation, discussion, conversations, it's best to just keep it to talking about ideas. Just leave the person out. It doesn't matter who they are, what their political orientation or what their religious beliefs are. Unless, of course, somebody's saying, well, because I'm a Christian, I believe Jesus died for our sins and he was resurrected on day 3 after he was murdered by the Romans and crucified and so on. Okay, are you making an empirical claim? Are you saying that actually happened? I mean, there was a fully functioning actual human being who was alive, and then he was dead for 3 days. And I mean, really dead, not in a coma, like sort of that Dan Brown novel almost scenario where he's whisked off the cross, still alive, in a coma, and then, put in the tomb and then whisked away to France where he started a family with Mary Magdalene. Anyway, or are you claiming it's mythically true? Like, well, I don't know. So Jesus was really dead, really resurrected from the dead and so on. I just think it's what I believe as a Christian or Catholic or whatever. Okay. But why do you believe it? Is it because you were raised to believe that, or this is what your social group believes? Is there some reason why you should believe it? And then the question is it okay to believe things without good reason? Now, I would say I would prefer not to. I would prefer to have good reasons, at least having thought it through carefully, before just, casting my beliefs to the faith winds. And but I mean, to your larger point, unless their identity is deeply tied into exactly what they're claiming, then just talk about the claims. And it's less likely to result in anger, hurt feelings, the conversation devolving into a shouting match, or as they say, reductio ad Hitlerum, where everything gets reduced to Hitler online in online debates. I think that's whose law is that? Is that Godwin's law? I forget. Where if online debates go on long enough, it result in somebody calling the other person Hitler or a Nazi. All right, and so that's not useful. Yeah. I mean, there are rules about how to debate, just like there are good rules about conversations. And I talk about that in the last one of the last chapters of Conspiracy. Yeah. How do you talk to a conspiracy theorist? Well, you can't just say you're an idiot to believe in QAnon or the rigged election or whatever. You actually have to find out what the person believes and ask them, and ask them why they believe that, and actually have a conversation about the claim itself, not the person.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue into your book, Conspiracy, Why the Rational Believe the Irrational. And it's a dive deep into our belief systems like we're discussing right now. And one of the most interesting aspects, I'm currently reading it, I haven't finished it yet, but you touch on our evolutionary blueprint and how it pays to be paranoid. Why? It's really a rational thing to believe the irrational, because I would like you to cover it, because I don't want to butcher your ideas, but it reminded me of Billy Joel's song of "You may be wrong, but you may be right," and how it pays off.
You may be wrong, you may be right. Right.
Would you like to cover, why is it that rationality pays off in terms of believing crazy ideas, and also how is the type 1 and type 2 errors playing into the equation as well as our evolutionary blueprint?
Right. So the thesis of my book is that it's not always irrational to believe conspiracy theories because some of them are true. So a conspiracy theory is just a theory about a possible conspiracy, which is 2 or more people plotting in secret to do something to a third party or organization that is illegal or immoral or whatever. And it's the secret part is it. So we know historically that conspiracies do happen all the time. They're quite common. So if you take something like JFK, now I think he was assassinated by a lone gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald. I don't think there was anyone else involved. I think the evidence is quite clear, and I present it in that chapter. And I consider the alternatives, of which there are none, really, or hundreds, of which there's no evidence for anybody else, and so on. But it's not irrational to think that there might have been a cabal to assassinate the president, because there have been numerous assassinations of foreign heads of state throughout history. It's not uncommon for the transfer of power to happen non-peacefully. We've been hearing this phrase, the peaceful transfer of power, because of the 2020 election, and Trump never conceded.
Yeah.
But in fact, historically, it was not usual for power to transfer peacefully. That's why Americans make such a big deal about that. We've never had that, a non-peaceful transfer of power. That's never happened in our entire history. And we make a big deal about it because actually that's rare. If you look at the transfer of power historically over the last 1,000 years or whatever, most of the time it's done violently. And so it's, or if you look at the history of the CIA since post World War II, we were involved in the assassination of foreign leaders, in rigging elections to aid dictators that were more favorable to American interests, usually during the Cold War, against communist dictators. So fascist dictators are better than communist dictators, and so on, in Central America, South America, Asia, and so on. So it's not irrational to think that, right? So I call this constructive conspiracism, that it's kind of almost a constructive paranoia, as it's called. That there's a kind of rationality to it. Now, that doesn't mean that the conspiracy theory is true. You have to take them one at a time and ask what's the evidence, and evaluate them independently. But in general, it's a signal detection problem. Is there a signal in the noise that it looks like there might be a conspiracy afoot? Is there, or is there not? So your theory that there is may be true, may not be true. So we have to evaluate it like we would any theory and ask for the evidence. Is there convergence of evidence that you're right, or is there no convergence of evidence, and so on. And so I have many long discussions in the book about how to do that. What questions should you ask? How should we evaluate the evidence for any particular conspiracy theory? But the larger point is that it's rational. There's a kind of rationality to thinking more conspiracy theories are true than they probably are, just in case. Because if you make the other kind of error, you assume that the conspiracy theory is not true, and it is, and they're out to get you. Yeah. That can be harmful to you, right? That's that line. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you. Sometimes they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that you point out, what's the evidence for our claims. And one of the biggest quote-unquote conspiracy theories that now became a fact was the Twitter files, how Elon Musk revealed all of the connections between the government and Twitter and social media, trying to censor some thinkers or some ideas, or even the Hunter Biden conversation, the Hunter Biden situation that happened. And what happened here was people were sniffing that something happened, actually, but they weren't given the information, they weren't given the evidence. And then afterwards, it became real, it became true that something was happening. So how can we approach these kinds of situations? And specifically, what are your thoughts with the Twitter files?
Yes, I've read those. It's a good start. A Twitter thread is not the same as, 5,000 word investigative piece in the New York Times that's been fact-checked by multiple editors and gone through, and there's multiple sources for each of the claims in the investigation and so on. The Twitter files is not at that level yet, in my opinion. It's good that we know these things, and it's not really surprising. Did anybody think that Twitter was not doing what we all thought they were doing the whole time, all these years, that they were shadow banning and screening out people that were more right-leaning than left-leaning? Conservatives have been complaining about that for the last 15 years. Yeah. Right? Am I getting that right? So let's just say at least the last decade. So none of that surprised me. The government involved in that also doesn't really surprise me, because I know a lot about the CIA and the FBI, which I researched for my book, about all the things they are up to. And of course, the CIA and the FBI would be involved in social media, because this is just yet another platform where information is exchanged, and we can collect it on people, from the president on down. The president's tweeting at 3 a.m, some crazy ideas he has rattling around in his head. That's good to know. So of course, the intelligence agencies all over the world are keeping track of this. And so it also didn't surprise me that they contacted Twitter. Now, it's not clear that Twitter was just an arm of intelligence agencies doing whatever the bidding was there. You can see from some of the Twitter files, there was conversation, resistance, like, we want to know if we should do this. Is this the right thing to do? You can see those memos where the Twitter employees are debating this. Okay, that's good. But in general, I think it's best we err on the side of transparency. That is, just let people have their say. Don't censor them. I don't think Trump should have been kicked off Twitter. I for one, I'm not a Trump fan, to say the least. I think he's been a massive disaster for the GOP. We need a sane, central, slightly to the right of center Republican Party to counter the crazy far left. And if the conservatives go too far to the right, then this is not good. But I do want to know what Trump's thinking at 3 a.m. when he's just kind of posting these crazy tweets, much like Elon does. Now, maybe this is not good. I kind of wish Elon would just go back to work and stay off Twitter, because his Tesla stock is tanked, and I own some of that. I own a Tesla too. It's like, come on, Elon, don't forget your other company, right? But like the Hunter Biden laptop story, so much has been made about that. I'm not sure how much there is there. And the only way to find out is, come on, just some investigative journalists, just look into it and just tell us what's there. And instead of using it as a political tool, which it has been on both sides. Mm-hmm. Right. So, I didn't like that it was buried just before, the October surprise before the 2020 election. But I'm old enough to remember there's always an October surprise supposedly coming all the way back to when Carter was president. And, Reagan looked like he might win. And there was just going to be this big October surprise that cans one of the two candidates. And that's been the case every election. And so none of that surprised me. But the answer to that is just put it all out there. Don't censor anybody. And, now I have to admit, it's a problem for a social media company that the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal doesn't have. That is to say, here's the analogy I use. Let's say the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal gets like 100 submissions for opinion editorials every day. And they publish maybe 1 or 2. In addition to their regular columnists. And those that are published are deeply fact-checked. They're edited by multiple people. I know, because I write these. And by the time it sees print and readers read it, it has been vetted very carefully to make sure you're not libeling somebody or saying something that's going to harm a company or whatever. They have lawyers that look at these things and so on. There's nothing like that online. How many tweets are there per second? I mean, it's like a million a second or something. I don't know what it is. So there's no way Twitter or Facebook, how many posts on Facebook are there, every minute, you have millions. There's no way any algorithm, any large set of employees can ever possibly fact check vent those things. So I don't know what the solution to that is, other than just let all the flowers bloom and just, you figure it out. Every consumer of content has to be their own fact checker and editor. And there are sites that do this, PolitiFact, for example. I like them. Snopes, my own site, skeptic.com. We do what we can to fact check things that are in our wheelhouse. And there's lots of sites like that. And that's just what you have to do. But what's the alternative? Just shut down the companies, break them up, regulate them, the government come in and swoop in. And already people are upset the government was involved talking to Twitter. Well, right. Wait do you see what the regulatory state will do if they get involved, right? So,
yeah. And one of the tools that we do have for us consumers is your book, Conspiracy, which shows us some tools to handle all of the noise that is happening in the internet, which has become, especially Twitter, has become our main source of information for so many people. And it's Nassim Taleb put it this way. He said that Twitter is like a cafe where it brings the biggest, most important scientists and, a regular worker who has a hot take on science. And you read the 2 tweets at the same time and you don't know how to discern which one is real and which one's not real. So, but your tools, your book really do help us in approaching this newfound genie in the bottle in a much better, healthier way for everyone. And
so there, even there, just you see a tweet about something that happens. Okay, the royal family or some murder, or a mysterious suicide or whatever. That's fine. It's fun to get information like that, but before you retweet or comment, maybe check Associated Press or the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, or NPR. Just look to see if there's some other sources that have looked into this. What do we know about this? I was just tweeting this morning about that murder, sort of a mass murder of a large family. I think it was 8 people, 5 children, 3 adults, and of this, it's in this town in Utah that's known to be mostly polygamous families. These fundamentalist Church of Latter-day Saints, fundamentalist Mormons, they still practice polygamy. It's not legal in the United States; it's illegal. But they marry one of the wives and then just have sister wives, as they're called, right? They're just girlfriends. There's nothing illegal about having affairs and committing adultery, being married to one woman and then having sex with other women. It's not illegal, right? So that's what they do. Well, all of a sudden, there's a story yesterday about, the social workers went to check on them because a lot of these fundamentalist Mormons live off of welfare, and they found them all dead. Okay, so I posted a link to John Krakauer's book, Under the Banner of Heaven, that traced the history of this murder in the 1980s. The Lafferty brothers killed one of the wives because she wasn't vibing the multiple wives thing, right? And so, sexual jealousy and power and this and that. And that led, and so the whole book is about this whole subject. And, that's not the only time something like that has happened. So I just posted, look, it's too early to tell. We don't know anything other than this happened. But do note, this town is mostly filled with fundamentalist Mormons. And we do know there are these weird cases like this. So it's probably something like related to polygamy, sexual jealousy, and so forth. And, so there, if you qualify and say, look, it's too soon to tell, but here's a few things that we know, and here's some references you can look up. To me, that seems okay, rather than just shooting my mouth off. I know what the cause of this, which I don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, if we have a wait-and-see approach, that pays better off in terms of also our own well-being. If I believe this was mangled by some bigger force, I'm going to feel overwhelmed as well, like you argue, and like you say, it's a very good insight. Michael, we're entering an election cycle, a presidential election cycle. We've been discussing tangentially, and your most recent publication, which is Nationalism, on the Skeptic magazine, also comes into play. And I would like to connect both your publication and your book Conspiracy in terms of the election cycle. How are we supposed to approach this cycle? And what are some of the things we should be in the lookout for in terms of information overload, conspiracy theories, and all of these ideas that get thrown out of us to either divide us or make us vote for one person against the other? What are some of your thoughts on this?
Right. I'm less worried than I was a few weeks ago. I was worried that Trump will probably get the nomination for the GOP, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. I was worried about it because, as you know, he's never even conceded that he lost, even though he did lose. He absolutely lost. Everybody knows but him. Maybe even he knows, and he's just, lying. But maybe he really believes that he won. I don't know. But for the most part, again, back to the peaceful transfer of power, this is a fundamental element of our democracy. If we can't have that, we don't really have a democracy. So that was where I'm worried about that. You hear this talk of civil war. There's not going to be a civil war or anything like what we had in the 1860s, but there could be a lot of violence and conflict like that, and just general divisiveness is not good. Again, the cover here of people screaming at each other out of hatred. So I would like to see more. I guess the way it used to be done, apparently, from what we have people that study congressional relationships across the aisle, that congressmen and senators from different parties used to hang out with each other. On the weekends, their kids would, play soccer games or whatever together, and they'd see each other. They'd have dinner together and drinks together, and then disagree with each other over immigration or tax policy or abortion or whatever. But they still got along, right? And that apparently no longer happens. They just hate each other, and that the other side is not just wrong, not just different, not just wrong, but immoral, evil. They want to destroy America, and the right accuses the left of that, and vice versa. We just have to get past that. And it's in part driven by social media, starting with actually conservative talk radio. I'm old enough to remember when this happened, when I started listening to Rush Limbaugh, and it's like, holy crap, this guy is just like way out there. And the further out he went, the bigger his ratings got, and the larger the audience. I thought, oh boy,
Wow.
yeah. But I kept waiting for the equivalent of that on the left, right? And there wasn't anybody doing that. Now we have maybe Bill Maher, Rachel Maddow, a few others, but nothing like Hannity and Tucker Carlson and so forth. Not all the radio people. There's just nothing like that. And I think the driving mechanism is that elected officials listen to those people, and they think, boy, I don't want to be denounced by Sean Hannity on Fox News. Oh my God, if I am, my constituency is going to disown me. So I better say things that, they're going to repeat or have me on their show. And I think that fuels it. If you're caught talking to or being friendly with a Democrat, if you're a Republican, maybe you get denounced on Fox News, and then you fear for your election. Or in the case of Liz Cheney, you hold sacred, deep values like honesty, integrity, and truth over and above your political platform. Planks in your platform like immigration or gun control or war or abortion or whatever. Liz Cheney gave up all of that to honor her deeper commitment to truth, and that ruined her career. She's done because Trump denounced her. Now maybe she can make a comeback. Who knows? But that's what I'm worried about. Let's just get back to kind of normal dirty politics rather than what we've been experiencing lately. What'll happen in 2024? It's hard to say. I don't really. No one knows. Maybe DeSantis or Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio. There's probably a dozen that we're going to see come out in the next, probably about 6 months from now. They'll start coming out and making noise about running, and then we'll see how Trump fares against them. He'll come up with his little schoolyard nicknames for them, like low energy Jeb and Lion Ted and little Marco and so on. He tried that with DeSantis. It didn't go over well. Ron DeSanctimonious, I think, is too many syllables. His followers are like, what? What's sanctimonious? I don't even know what that means. Right. So I think maybe his schoolyard taunts aren't going to work anymore, which is good. I don't think Trump should be allowed anywhere near the White House. Maybe he should even be in prison for all I know. I don't know. I'm not. Now I know people listening to this go, oh, Shermer's got Trump derangement syndrome. No, I don't. You do. If you think this guy should be president, you are deranged, right? I mean, he is not a conservative. He has no values other than whatever serves him well. He is a dark triad, psychopath, Machiavellian, and what's the third one? So psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and narcissism. Yeah, narcissism. And so that's anyway. So I'm kind of rambling now. I don't want to focus too much on Trump, but you asked what am I concerned? That would be it. If he just disappears and the GOP gets back to the way they usually do things, and they come up with somebody like a John McCain or a Mitt Romney, somebody like that, then I'm not. If they got elected, then I wouldn't be worried.
And you also touch on a civil war, which God forbid happens, and it seems that it's being fueled by the beliefs of divisiveness, and like you say, this philosophy of us versus them. They're evil, we're not. We're virtuous, they're not. And as individuals, personal emotions come into play, which are of course anxiety, loss of control. They're trying to mingle with my own American dream version. What does that mean? And so how can we as individuals tune down, because elected officials seem not to be doing it, but from our end, this heated conversation, and how can we plug in your ideas into this civil war topic?
Yeah, well, so at the end of Conspiracy, I have a whole chapter on this, and I talk about the Constitution of Knowledge. Jonathan Rauch's book by that title is really good. Just the kind of the commitment to the values and norms that we have developed over the centuries, like truth-telling, skepticism, fact-checking, editing, just a commitment to working together to try to figure out what's true. And this is true in journalism, it's true in science, true in criminal justice. There's techniques we've developed in all these fields to get around all the flaws in our reasoning that I mentioned: my side bias, hindsight bias, confirmation bias, and so on. And those are rampant in all fields, everywhere. So we have to work around that. And it really begins with all of us just kind of committing to those values and those norms and reinforcing them. And just like it's not cool to laugh at racist jokes or misogynist jokes or jokes about Jews or Poles or whatever. When I was a kid in the 60s, people, there were Polish jokes, what do you call a Pole, or what do you call, and that's just not cool anymore. Or, Jews, making fun of Jews, or, dumb blondes or whatever, or God forbid, use the N-word, which was not unusual in, say, the 60s and 70s. And we just don't do that anymore. It's not cool. It's not only not cool, you could be canceled. And, I'm generally not a fan of cancel culture, but I do like pushing back against people who break those norms and just say, you know what, dude, that's just not, don't do that anymore. Don't say that anymore. That's just not cool. Stop that. And from there, from the bottom up, it all kind of trickles out into culture through language, how we talk to each other. And that then gets transcribed into television scripts, comic books, novels, nonfiction works, television shows, films, and across the board, all of us have our kind of moral consciousness raised very slowly, but not too slowly. I mean, it happens in the course of years and decades. Slow enough you don't really see it until you look back and go, wow, look at the way people used to talk back in the 60s about Jews and blacks and women, and they just don't do that anymore. Okay, so I would prefer that over top-down, passing draconian laws by fiat. The government's going to make you do things. I'm not a fan of compelled speech. In fact, I'm against compelled speech, as is the Supreme Court. Supreme Court on almost every case, they vote against compelled speech. Yeah. And just let people say whatever they want. But let's make it clear: certain things we would prefer you not to say, because it's just not cool to say that. And but if you want to be critical, like I'm always. Almost every time I post something or write something about trans issues, how many trans are there, right? I mean, this is an empirical question. Now, the data is pretty messy on this question, but it's pretty small number, probably 1/10 of 1%. But even if it's 1%, it doesn't really matter what the percent is. We should not discriminate against trans people, and I always say that. Trans people should not be fired for being trans. They shouldn't be discriminated against for jobs or mortgages and so on. Definitely. But my saying that I think trans is a vanishingly small category, and people that say, oh, no, it's huge. Everybody's a little bit trans. There was that video going around yesterday about that poem somebody was reading, a trans person was reading about, we're all a little bit trans. No, we're not. That's an empirically false statement. Right. But it's not transphobe for me to say that. I'm just, it's just an empirical question.
What about sports? What's your take on sports and trans people?
Oh, well, I wrote a couple of strong columns I have a Substack Skeptic column, continuation of my Scientific American column. So I wrote one called What is a Woman Anyway? About the sort of classic, or a man, if you want, what does it mean to use these words? These are concepts, cognitive concepts that the words represent. And so my point was, if everybody can be a man or a woman no matter what, just by declaring it, then the word really doesn't have any meaning. If a man can get pregnant and if a woman has a penis, then what do those words mean? So there's that. And then, and again, if you personally, you can do whatever you want. I don't care. You should not be discriminated against. You have the same rights as me. You're protected by the Constitution if you're a U.S. citizen. All that is a given. But if you want to compete, Alex, let's say you say, well, I'm a woman now. I'm going to compete against women in swimming or tennis or track and field or whatever. Okay, hang on now. Now we have a conflict, because the reason we have women's sports at all is because clearly there's a physical difference between men and women on athletic performance in most sports. So, and I always quote Thomas Sowell, there are no solutions, they're just compromises. You can't have everything. You can't have women have the right to compete against other women in sports and have men have the right to compete against women in their own divisions in sports. You can't have both, right? You got to. So, unfortunately, that the incident with the Penn swimmer Leah Thomas looks like it's going in the direction of protecting women's sports. The International Swimming organization that sanctions swimming meets around the world, has now said that you would have had to transition before puberty. And because the previous rule was if you take a year off and you take the hormones post puberty, then you can call yourself a woman. But it's clear that it's too late. After puberty, the physical differences are massive. I mean, like 10, 20, 30% difference in performances, not even close. And so, knocking back your testosterone for a year does very little. You already have the massive frame and large bones and different ligaments and tendons and muscles, and just knocking back your VO2 uptake, oxygen capacity, or strength by 1% or whatever, it's just not going to do it. It's not fair. So that's my thoughts on that.
Really interesting. And these kind of topics have really a lot of moving parts, and it's important to ask questions on how do we think about these issues, and how can we approach it in a meaningful, constructive way, like you say. How can we compromise to have best of all worlds, so we can all thrive as human beings and be respected towards one another, like you mentioned, not be discriminated. And your ideas do truly invite us to do that collectively. And as we begin to wrap up, Michael, if I could give you a magic wand right now, and if I could tell you, you could literally instill an idea or a thought process into everyone's mind, just like a software, into their software, what would be your answer?
Epistemic humility. That is to say, be humble before the world, because you don't know that you're right, and I don't either. None of us do. Okay. Again, back to where we begin. I'm not omniscient, and neither are you. I'm not God, neither are you. There is an objective reality. I don't know what it is, and neither do you. Right. So we have to be humble before the facts, before the world, and go, you know what? I think this is the way it is, but I could be wrong. Just put that in there, like every other sentence, or just once a day, say, you know what? I could be wrong, just in case, and be willing to change your mind.
Yeah.
And even if you're not really going to change your mind, at least say or think, you know what, I might change my mind. Probably not, like say for me on the theory of evolution, which I know a lot about. It's unlikely that that's going to turn out to be a false theory, and so I'm unlikely to change my mind. But I could be wrong. I'm willing to give it your best shot. Tell me what you think, and show me why I'm wrong. And that, even if you don't do anything about it, at least it makes you a little more humble and open to other people, and maybe a little less hateful of other people for having different ideas.
Yeah. This is sort of a rapid fire segment. What is one conspiracy theory that blew your mind, that became true? What is one that really...
Oh, I would say all the different activities of the FBI and the CIA in the 50s, 60s, just say the Cold War, really was quite surprising when a lot of these things came to light, starting with the Church Committee and other investigations in the 90s, and the Pentagon Papers, Afghanistan Papers, WikiLeaks. There's a lot of these big data dumps. You're like, what? We were doing what? Really? Wow. And there's enough of those. Operation Paperclip, in which we're hiring these former Nazis to work on weapons for our country, biological weapons, chemical weapons, nuclear weapons, rocketry, and so on. Project MK Ultra, mind control of other people using hallucinogenic drugs, psychoactive drugs, and so on, like LSD, dosing U.S. citizens without their knowledge or consent. This is illegal now. It wasn't at the time, I guess. Our own assassination of foreign leaders. After the Cold War, there was 3 strategies for a U.S. president. You can go to war, you can use diplomacy, and if those 2 don't work, and with nuclear weapons, you really want to avoid war if possible. If diplomacy breaks down, they had a third option: use the CIA to go in there and assassinate this guy, or help him, the other party overturn him in a coup. And we did a lot of that, a lot. or the FBI's COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program, spying on U.S. citizens, infiltrating civil rights groups, including those of Dr. King, blackmailing Martin Luther King Jr. They audio taped his sexcapades in hotel rooms with women, and threatened to make those tapes public if he didn't either kill himself or at least quit being a civil rights activist. And it's like, wait, the FBI did this? What? Wow. I mean, isn't Dr. King a U.S. citizen protected by the Constitution, right? And there was no court order. They didn't go to a judge and go, hey, we got to wiretap this guy's phones because we think he's a threat, which they can do. That's legal. No, they just did it. So there's enough of those. This gets back to my constructive conspiracism. There's enough of that that's gone on that people are aware of, so that when they hear somebody like an Alex Jones ranting about a false flag operation or an inside job, that's not completely crazy, because those kind of things have happened.
Wow. Yeah, with that in mind, that's the other question that I had is, what are some of the current modern contemporary conspiracy theories circling right now that you're keeping an eye on, that you're seeing this hasn't been proved yet, but I'm paying close attention to them just in case?
Well, the rigged election one, that's pretty much over, but still significant percentages of people believe it, or at least they tell pollsters they believe it. Now, maybe once Trump is gone, really gone, people will just quit saying that they believe that anymore. And they'll quit telling pollsters they believe it, whatever's in their heart and minds, who knows. But that QAnon is still around. I'm just consulting on a court case about an incident where a QAnon group kind of tried to shut down this hospital. There's people still doing crazy things like that, that you have to kind of keep an eye on. Of course, in a way, the Sam Bankman-Fried, crypto, all that stuff, that's a kind of conspiracy theory, that these people are up to something, and maybe they are something that's illegal, immoral, without people's knowledge or consent, doing things that really harms them. That again, he has to have a fair trial, right? So we'll see. And in all cases like that, more information is better. So those are the kinds of things I'm paying attention to. Mostly political. I'm like back to this issue. We're monitoring the religious right. Kind of this different from the way it was in the 1980s with the moral majority. These are a little more nefarious. This kind of Christian nationalism of not just trying to influence politics to get policies to help our party versus the other party, but really to break down the wall separating church and state. There's a lot of people, millions of Americans, Christians, who believe that America is a Christian nation, and that we should get back to those values. And people that are not Christian have no place in America. Wow. Okay. There's a lot of people that believe that. So I'm worried about that. That's another one. And they these seemingly innocent sounding things, like we're going to have a prayer breakfast next month, and everybody's invited, and we're inviting our local mayor, or the governor, or senator, congressman, even a president. Presidents attend these prayer breakfasts. These are not innocent get-togethers, right? I mean, this is big money fueling campaigns to get the senators, congressmen, presidents, and especially Supreme Court justices we want to get our religion into the public life, into political life, right? I mean, that's really the overturning of Roe v. Wade. That was the result of really 30, 40, just say 30 years of concerted effort. By the time these people kind of got their act together in the 90s and aughts and tens, to really try to influence the selection of Supreme Court justices to get them to overturn Roe v. Wade. And they did. Right? Now, I don't blame Trump for this, because I think those same three justices, or three pretty much just like them, would have been nominated by a Ted Cruz or a Marco Rubio or whoever might have won. And so, that's a longer term concern of mine.
Wow. There's a lot to unpack there, and I'm to become more informed in my end about those topics.
Read Skeptic magazine.
Absolutely, yeah.
We're on it.
I'll definitely subscribe. And Michael, as we wrap up, there's just so many topics that we haven't touched, but I believe we did a great job in terms of going into the macro, the micro, in terms of discussing how your ideas truly can do an effect in terms of how we think, how we engage, and how we approach others, and how we create meaningful dialogue without us really being intertwined emotionally. Because, like you say, we're in a very dynamic world. One of the most dynamic, I can argue, in history. A lot of moving parts, artificial intelligence, social media, the elections, and the only way to be really have an ace in our hands is ideas like yours to be epistemologically humble. Say my word, just so much information.
It's all right.
So much information happening that my brain is taking time.
It's all right.
Like you say, these are some of the tools we have as individuals to cope with an ever-moving world. So I appreciate you coming here and joining me into one of the most interesting conversations I've had in a while.
All right. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Michael, and we'll stay in touch.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.